Welcome everyone to this new episode of our vlog series. I am Maurizia Di Buono, PhD candidate at the Center for Law and Economics here at ETH Zurich. Globalization allowed for millions of connections between strangers in large and anonymous networks. This opened up to new opportunities to benefit from exchanges, but also to new challenges, in particular the one to sustain cooperation between people who don't know each other and cannot rely on personal reputation. Two main solutions are often used for this problem. The first one is social punishment, which is in the form of excluding non-cooperators. And the second one is monetary exchange, which allows people to trade without relying on personal trust. But which one works best in small groups and which one scales up when as society grows large? But then, can they cooperate? And what happened to the real structure of social network depending on which one we decide to rely on? Today, with us, we have Maria Bigoni, Professor of Economics at the University of Bologna. Welcome, Maria.
Thank you, Maurizia, for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
So before we dive into the discussion of the paper, can you tell us a bit more about the background and the main research idea behind your paper?
So this paper belongs to my main line of research, which in general, as you mentioned before, is focused on what are the institutions and in general the environmental characteristics that promote the emergence and sustainability of cooperation, and in particular cooperation among a large number of unrelated individuals. Cooperation is one of the most successful characteristics of the human species, but when it evolved at the beginning of our life on Earth, it was cooperation among a relatively small number of individuals that are related by family ties or friendship. And there, it was relatively easy to sustain cooperation by relying on mechanisms of reciprocity, direct and indirect reciprocity. But when our society grew larger, which is happening at an unprecedented pace in recent years, well, as society grow larger, then the social ties loosens, and hence it may be extremely difficult to coordinate and sustain cooperative outcomes. The temptation to hide in the crowd and defect may become too strong. So we need to understand which institutions are still able to promote cooperation in these large environments. And in this paper we compare, as you mentioned, 3 institutions. 2 of them are based on social exclusion. That is, if I realize that someone is not cooperating, is not contributing to the social welfare, this person is excluded from society, either temporarily or permanently. The other institution is monetary trade, which basically means that we only cooperate, we only offer our services to those that are able to pay for them. And the only way for us to acquire money is to offer services to others. So if you don't offer any service to the society, you will not have money, and thus you will not be able to exploit others people help without contributing to the welfare of society. So that's the fundamental idea. The question is whether these alternative institutions work equally well, and whether they work equally well in society of different scales.
Your research puts together 3 strands of literature which are not often discussed together. The first one is the experimental study of social dilemma. Then we have the endogenous emergence of money, and then networks. And at the core of your design, there is an helping game between strangers who interact within a network. And the only way to sustain cooperation is either through social punishment, social exclusion in particular, and or with the voluntary exchange of intrinsically worthless tokens. But can you walk us through the theoretical intuition behind your paper, and in particular, why should we expect this mechanism to sustain a cooperative, efficient outcome?
Sure. So first of all, let me start from this helping game. What is a helping game? Well, in practice, in very simple words, the helping game is a situation between two people, one in the role, we can call it a producer of a service, and the other one in the role of a consumer. Producing a service is costly, of course, for the producer, but the service is useful for the consumer. And actually the utility, the value that the consumer attributes to the service is higher than the cost borne by the producer, which means that exchanging this service is efficient. It generates a surplus. So we want this exchange to go through. Without money, what happens is that this interaction is not one shot. So sometimes I'm a producer, sometimes I'm a consumer, and I interact with different people. And ideally, in the long run, if everyone, when in the role of producers, help all the consumers, everyone is better off. Much better than if each and every one of us only relies on their own means and abilities. However, if when I'm a producer, I can only choose whether to offer my services to everyone who is in my network without being able to discriminate and help someone without helping someone else, which is what happens in large networks. Well, the problem is that everyone has an incentive to enjoy the services of the producers when in the role of consumers without ever reciprocating. So the only way I have to prevent exploitation from these free riders is to cut them out of my network. So if I don't want to help you, if I realize that you never help me back, so I don't want to help you, then I cut my link with you and you're out of my network. So I can keep on cooperating with everyone who's in my network, but my network shrinks. And the smaller is my network, the smaller is the number of services that I potentially can receive from others. So then the smaller is the network, the smaller is the potential efficiency that is generated. An alternative to that is monetary exchange. So I keep you in my network and I offer my service to everyone who's in my network. However, I'll only offer my service in exchange for some tokens, which implies that if in the past you, who are in my network, did not offer your services to others, you will end up without money, and so you will not be able to use my services. But if you go back to the economy, start producing services again, then you're back in the situation of having money and being able to repay me. So the good thing of monetary trade is that if someone defects and realizes that this is not optimal, in a very short amount of time, that person is able to go back to the network and back on equilibrium. It is a mechanism that is able to restore cooperation after deviations very easily, much more easily than permanent or temporary ostracism.
Let's now turn to the experimental part of your research. In your paper, you have this experiment in which you compare small and large networks and with the three-way of cooperation. This is very elegant, and I guess it hides some design choices. Can you reason a little bit your design choices, and in particular, can you share with us what you think worked best and what do you think what you see as the main limitation of your work?
Yes, so there is one design choice that I think is critical for the results, which is the fact that in our economies, people change roles across periods in a deterministic way, which means that if today I'm a producer, I'm sure tomorrow I'll be a consumer. This is a design choice that we intentionally implemented because we wanted to be possible for all three institutions, permanent ostracism, temporary ostracism, and monetary trade. All of these institutions should be able to sustain 100% efficiency in equilibrium. However, this choice introduces an element of lack of realism to the situation. Why? Because if I'm a consumer several times in a row, of course, eventually, at some point, I may run out of money, which implies that at some point I will not be able to buy services from producers, even if in the past I've never defected. So this is something that we would like to explore in future research, but it is also something that we have explored in the past. Both theoretically and empirically, it reduces the efficiency enhancing function of money, but it does not eliminate it completely. And in fact, we have previous evidence showing that in large economies, even with this limitation, money outperforms alternative institutions. So money does work pretty well in large societies, even if we remove this pretty strong assumption. Other assumptions that are simplifying assumptions in the experiment, I think, are less critical. So, for example, our choice to distribute tokens that are these intrinsically worthless objects that can be exchanged for services, for help, we distribute them evenly at the beginning, so there is no inequality ex ante in society. This is not a very strong assumption because the way in which the institution of monetary trade works is such that if an imbalance exists, it is going to disappear very soon. The intuition is that if I'm a producer, and the only reason why I want to produce is because I want to have money to be able to buy services in the future, but I have already a lot of money, then there is no reason why I should produce. I keep on spending money until I have no money anymore, and thus then I have a reason to produce and get money again. So no one has an incentive in this simple economy to accumulate money because, and again, due to this alternation of roles, there is no motives to accumulate money for precautionary reasons.
The results of your research are striking, and you did a little spoiler before. But can you summarize a little bit more them for us? And in particular, can you unpack the mechanism behind them?
Yeah, so the main result we have is that when we consider economies of a relatively small size, we observe that temporary ostracism, temporary social exclusion, and monetary exchange actually work equally well. Both of them work better than permanent ostracism, and the reason why permanent ostracism is not so good for social efficiency is that by permanently destroying links, connections, we reduce the potential efficiency generated by the network, the number of possible exchanges that take place in the society. But when we move to larger networks, we observe that temporary social exclusion does not do much better than permanent social exclusion, while monetary trade does better, not only than temporary exclusion, but it does even better in large networks than in small networks. So the results seem to suggest that monetary trade is something that is particularly useful and particularly efficient from the behavioral point of view in networks of a large size. And our interpretation of the mechanism behind this result has to do with the costs of implementing different punishment mechanisms. So, punishment is essential in these economies to deter free riding. So if I don't help others, there must be negative consequences for me in the future. In the case of social exclusion, the consequence is that I cannot benefit from others' cooperation in future periods. In the case of monetary trade, the consequence is that I don't have money, I cannot buy services in the future. But implementing punishment has a cost, in particular in terms of social exclusion, for the punisher as well. It has two types of costs. One is the cost of reducing one's own network. If I cut a link with you, it means not only that I will not help you in the future, but I also give up the possibility of using your help in the future. So I'm reducing my own potential of receiving services in the future. And on top of that, there is also a cognitive cost related to the implementation of social exclusion, because in order to exclude from my network the defectors, the free riders, I need to look for them, single them out, identify them, and select individually which links I want to preserve and which links I want to cut, which becomes more and more difficult as the number of links I have increases. Monetary trade reduces both costs. First of all, because by trading help in exchange for tokens, I don't need to cut the links. Because if you don't have money, you will not buy services from me. So it is automatic. Punishment is kind of automatically implemented without me having to condition my strategy on the outcome of past interactions. So the strategy is simpler, it is less costly for the punisher, it is also cognitively less costly because it does not require individual monitoring of different links, the different connections. And the result of that is that we observe that actually defectors eventually are punished more often with monetary trade than with alternative institutions, which lowers the expected gains for defectors and at the same time increases the expected gains for cooperators, which in the long run makes it more convenient to cooperate even if you are not intrinsically motivated to do so. So even if you have an intrinsic motivation to maximize your own profits, the institution is such that it induces you, if it is adopted by the majority of the people in the population, it will induce you to behave well, even if this is not something that you would naturally do because of your own predispositions.
Thank you for sharing your research with us today. As a final question, can you talk us about the broader implication, both normative and policy implication of your work? And being an empiricist myself, a question that comes natural to my mind is how you think your framework can be translated into an empirical setting. Then it would be also interesting to know where do you see your research agenda going next?
Okay, thank you. Thank you for your questions about the empirical correspondence of my research and the policy implication, because it allows me to make some important caveats. So it is crucial to remember that what we're talking about here is a laboratory experiment and a theoretical model, both of which rely on important simplifying assumptions. The beauty and the power of this approach is that it allows us to isolate in a very clean way the mechanisms that we are after. But the cost of it is that, of course, we need to introduce and to rely on strong simplifying assumptions that make it difficult to establish a direct link with empirical situations that are similar. And yet I think that there are several markets or several institutions, if you want, or situations that resemble the type of situation that we depict in our experiments and in the model. Think of those online networks like Reddit or GitHub, where people exchange knowledge that is valuable for all the members of the network. But of course, the network and being part of a network is valuable for me only if I can also learn something from others, not just offer my knowledge. Or platforms like BlaBlaCar or platforms for sharing houses when you go on vacation, where the benefit that you derive from being in the network is proportional to the number of people offering their houses or their lift or their cars to the network. And of course, you're allowed to stay in the network as long as you also contribute. We could compare how these platforms work and the efficiency generated by these platforms with platforms that offer similar services for money, for example, Airbnb. So the question is, which one works best, under which circumstances these platforms thrive, and under which circumstances they fall into troubles, and which precautions do they take in order to prevent people from exploiting the platform without contributing to the welfare generated by it. So that's for the empirical counterpart. In terms of policy implication, again, we need to take our results with a pinch of salt, because these are obtained in a controlled and simplified environment, but I do think that they have relevant implications for contemporary societies, in particular societies in which we have, with development of information technology, we have the means of acquiring very granular information on individual histories and reputations. And this information, in principle, could be exploited in order to implement very precise and targeted mechanisms of social exclusion at the individual level or at the centralized level. And this brings me to some of the research questions that I would like to investigate in the future. So the question is both theoretical and empirical. Suppose that we have a centralized institution that implements this kind of social exclusion, targeting defectors in a very efficient way. Is this institution really going to promote cooperation, or is it going to destroy mutual trust in society? Remember that cooperation is always one outcome, but it's never the only possible equilibrium. So we always have a coordination issue. So while from a theoretical perspective, such a centralized monitoring institution could be welfare improving, whether it is socially desirable and whether people would vote in favor of such an institution is an empirical question which I would like to investigate, and which I think speaks to the current debate of on whether this kind of monitoring systems are desirable or should be something that we want to regulate even from a legal perspective. And on the other hand, we still have the alternative, that is monetary trade, whose advantage is that it remains a completely anonymous institution, an institution that does not rely on individual surveillance mechanisms or monitoring mechanisms. And the question is whether such an institution in a real world environment with all the complications, the additional complications of a real-world environment, could in fact still work in order to sustain and preserve cooperative outcomes in societies that grow larger and larger and more complex.
Thank you again, Maria, for being with us today. We are looking forward for your future contributions.
Thank you very much for having me. It has been a real pleasure.
And for our vlog viewers, we hope you like these episodes as much as we did. See you next time!